Welcome aboard, everyone. It's Thursday afternoon, and you've joined the Hockey Debates podcast. I'm Bob Duff, joined today by my esteemed partner and Hall of Fame writer, Kevin Allen, and from sportsbettingdime.com, their leads odds maker, Sascha Paruk. We are the Hockey Debates podcast, powered by sportsbettingdime.com, your leading source for odds, sports news, and game predictions. If you're looking to see who's the favorite to win the Stanley Cup, the Hart Trophy, or who's going to win a specific series, check out all the info at sportsbettingdime.com. We'll be talking about some of their playoff odds today, and we'll also leave a link in the description at the end of this episode for you to check out what they have to offer. And what we have to offer today is some stunning results. And technically, I guess this isn't the first round of the playoffs, but it sure is playing out like the first round of the playoffs so often does, with wild outcomes. Let's start right now with what happened last night. I mean, the odds on the Canadiens and the Penguins did a complete 180 after last night's game, kind of like the game itself. You know, Pittsburgh was up 3-1, and they lost 4-3. And Pittsburgh was the minus 195 favorite to win this series when they took the ice last night. As they awoke today, Montreal is now the minus 195 favorite. So, Sasha, what do you think's going on here? Are the Penguins dead? Are the Canadiens going to move on? Are we seeing a stunning upset here?
I think there's a pretty good chance that we're seeing a stunning upset. I'm not sure if I'm prepared to lay minus 190, but the difference for me in this series so far is goaltending. Carey Price has been just the far superior goaltending, and I don't think anyone saw that coming. If he'd sort of given any hints that he was going to return to this sort of form in the course of the regular season before the hiatus, I don't think he would have seen Pittsburgh open as such a big favorite, given what everyone, including oddsmakers, knows about how sort of random the NHL playoffs are. But heading into this series, it looked like Pittsburgh was going to have the advantage in basically all three areas: forwards, defense, and goaltending. You're talking about Matt Murray, who was a Stanley Cup winner, and I actually don't even think they're playing their best goalie right now. I think they should be playing Tristan Jarry. But yeah, at this point in time, I wouldn't lay minus 190 on the Canadiens winning this series, but they certainly are deserving favorites, only needing one of the next two and having the hotter goaltender.
Well, in 2016, in the Eastern Conference Final, when they were staring at elimination and needed to win 2 games in a row to survive, Pittsburgh coach Mike Sullivan went from Stanley Cup winner Marc-Andre Fleury to Matt Murray, who was then a rookie. Does history repeat itself here, Kevin? And will we see rookie Tristan Jarry in Game 4?
I think it's possible. Sullivan is a pretty bold coach, and I think he's a coach that has a pretty good handle on his players. And I think if he feels that Jarry would give them the best opportunity, I don't think he'll hesitate. Even though, long term, I think Murray is the guy they're going to keep. I mean, that's just a hunch on my part. But they've got expansion coming up. Jim Rutherford, the GM, has already publicly said that probably one of the goalies will have to be moved. But I think the Penguins still see this as one of their last opportunities to make a run at the Cup, and it feels like a good shot. Like, they're not the favorite by any stretch, but I think they believe they could win it if things went well for them. So I think they're going to pull out all the stops to try to win it, and I don't think they're necessarily dead. Because they have a lot of experience in dealing with, adversity. And, you look at it and people are going to, if the Canadiens do win this, people are going to remember that Carey Price kind of carried the day. You look at his .937 save percentage and you remember some of the big stops he made. But I think it's been more than that. Like, Shea Weber has just been a beast in these, in this first qualifying round series. And, there's just been a lot of players like Jeff Petrie coming up with 2 huge goals at opportunistic times. Suzuki has had his moments. They've had 4 or 5 or 6 guys that have kind of stepped up and played. And it's hard to think of a Penguin who has, pushed his game to its highest level. And I think we have 4 or 5 doing that for Montreal. So, I think that they are a legitimate favorite because they only got to win 1 game. But I still believe that the Penguins' experience will serve them well. I expect to at least see a Game 5.
Well, at the start of the playoffs, Sasha, Montreal was a plus 6,000 long shot to win the Stanley Cup of all the 24 teams that made it into this return to play tournament. And at the same time, they were the plus 1,000 chalk to get the win in the NHL draft lottery because everyone expected them to lose this round and put themselves Alexis Lafreniere. And Montreal hasn't had a superstar French-Canadian player since Guy Lafleur. But if you're a Canadiens fan right now, do you kind of have mixed emotions?
Yeah, very much so. I think based on what you've seen so far, you're a little bit more confident in your team's ability to win a round or two if you make it into the playoffs proper. But I don't see anything from them that is going to give you any sort of confidence that you are winning the Stanley Cup this year. And if that's the ultimate goal versus just seeing a few more games from your team, then bowing out and getting Lafreniere would be a much better option going forward.
Here's how I would put that. Anybody in Montreal who's 30 and under sees it the way Sasha just spelled it out. Anyone who's over 30 wants them to make whatever run they can make, just because, playoff hockey is so huge in Montreal. I've talked about it so many times, but there's no city that you can go to in the NHL during a playoff series that the series takes over the city quite like Montreal. And I would say that for sure. Older Canadians, as much as they would love to have Lafreniere, I think they would rather see an upset over the Penguins and see what they could do, even with this team that doesn't appear to have any shot.
Yeah, and I think right now you're staring down the barrel of a first-round series with the Lightning, who have the inside track on the number one seed, and the Lightning have won 4 straight against the Canadiens relatively handily.
Yeah.
They could play a markedly similar game to what Columbus did last year and get equally good goaltending and pull just as big an upset. But you said, if I'm a Canadiens fan and I'm 4 years younger than I am now, I would rather have the draft pick.
Kevin, we were probably guilty of this, both of us covering the Red Wings all the years we did, of expecting more out of guys like Zetterberg and Datsuk and Lidstrom as they got older, because we remembered kind of their past successes. But those last few years when that trio was together, the Wings really couldn't get anywhere in the playoffs. Are we doing the same thing with the Penguins here with Malkin and Crosby and Letang? Those guys have been going to the wars for a long time now. Are we maybe not realizing that they're on the other side of the hill? They've already crested it?
It's a fair question, but, I watched the Penguins a lot this season, and there were times when they were playing a brand of hockey that, we don't really associate with the Pittsburgh Penguins. For as long as I can remember, and I've covered the league 35 years, the Penguins are a synonym for offense. And, this season I saw them play a style that I thought, boy, would really work quite well in the postseason. It would be different than we're accustomed to. And I thought they had sort of built a team that actually could make a run. Again, I didn't see them as a favorite, but I saw them as a contender. I think Crosby and Malkin are still playing at a high enough level. Like, are they the guys that they were 10 years ago? No. But, they're still elite level players. I still put Crosby and Malkin in the top, 5 or 6 players in the game. And, I think they're, both Crosby and Malkin are a little bit, higher up the food chain than, Zetterberg and Datsuk. So, even though I understand your comparison, I think Crosby and Malkin are still doing enough that, if they could win this series, like nobody's going to want to play the Penguins. Not with Crosby and Malkin, not at your first and second center.
Yeah, you'd be looking at Penguins Bruins if they do manage to advance, and Boston ends up with the number 4 seed, as it looks like they're going to.
And I think they've put themselves in the most awful position they could. Not only have they given Carey Price a chance to steal a game and beat them, they've given him 2 chances to steal a game and beat them, basically. So you've got to hope that the Hart Trophy, Vezina Trophy winning Carey Price doesn't show up 2 nights in a row.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing about the Penguins too is that for so many years it always seemed like they were 1 forward short in their top 6, and so with the development of Jake Gunsel and the trade for Zucker, they have enough forwards now. For the first time that I can remember, enough guys to play with both Crosby and Malkin and have 2 formidable lines with a scorer for each guy. So, if they, lose this series because, it doesn't seem like they're ready, or they took them too lightly. I mean, Crosby said in the post game yesterday that they were just too loose with the lead, and just, didn't clamp down like you have to against any NHL team. And, did they do that simply because it was the Montreal Canadiens? That seems like the only explanation.
I think that if they do end up going out, we're going to look back on this and say that Pittsburgh was one of the teams that was hurt the most by such a long layoff. Because Kevin's right, they have played a sort of drastically different, more defensively minded style of play this year that I think a lot of players on the team hadn't really played before. I think it was very sort of system dependent, system heavy. And then you've added in a bunch of new faces at the trade deadline who aren't really accustomed to it, and just sort of flipping the switch instantly to get back to the sort of optimal level of play with that specific style in mind, I think has been very difficult for them.
And we mentioned Jeff Petrie earlier. Habs fans will like this little bit of trivia. He's the first Montreal defenseman to score 2 game-winning goals in the same series since Chris Chelios in 1989. And just by coincidence, in 1989, the Canadiens made it to the Stanley Cup final. So who knows? Maybe it's an omen. But Jeff Petrie's old team looks like they're in trouble too, the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, you're looking at an NHL. I mean, if you're an NHL marketing guy, you got to be chewing your fingernails down to the quick right now because you're on the brink of losing Crosby, Malkin, McDavid, and Draisaitl all in the first round of the playoffs. Like, what's going on out west, Kevin?
Well, it just makes me sad, to see this because, I thought we had some growth out of that Edmonton Oilers team. And, I've been told, and I'd even seen, I thought was some improvement out of their defensive play. But, it's the most unique series in this first round. There's the hockey that I'm watching elsewhere is physical. It's heavy defensive hockey. It's hard to score goals, and the Oilers are just going up and down and trying to get 6 goals a game. And you know what? The Hawks can score too. And Jonathan Taves saying, "Oh, this is how you want to play." Well, we can do that. And we might even be able to do some other things that will give us the win, and that's exactly what's happened. So I've really been disappointed in the Oilers, and to me, it's the same old Oilers. There's been no improvement there in terms of their defensive game. I thought they would clamp down a little bit. So, right now, I think the Blackhawks, I see them winning that just based on the fact that this is not their first rodeo. They've been around the block many times, dealing with these, they have those top guys, Taves and Kane and Duncan Keith and Brandon Saad, like they have the equivalent of a master's degree on the art of winning important games. So I think they're going to close this series out.
Well, the odds makers certainly agree with you, Kevin. They've got Chicago as the overwhelming minus 225 favorite to take that series now. Prior to Game 3, Edmonton was the minus 162 chalk. So it's swung. The pendulum's gone way over to Chicago's side. And to me, Sasha, this almost seems like the perfect storm for Chicago. If there was one team that fit Chicago's style of play the best in the West, it was the Oilers. Because Chicago does okay when they play teams that were willing to trade chances. If you got to clamp it down and play tight, Chicago doesn't fare so well.
Yeah, it was very fortunate for Chicago to get this and very unfortunate for the Oilers, especially when you consider what would have happened in a regular season. Chicago's season was done. And to not only get this sort of lifeline of getting a play-in round, but to get your sort of ideal matchup just based on the fact that they went, and even the fact that the NHL went with this sort of points percentage system strictly from the conference instead of take the top 2 teams from each division and give them the buys. You would have had Edmonton going to the first round already. So it was a very, very unfortunate confluence of circumstances for Edmonton fans.
If the Oilers, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but if the Oilers lose this series and get Lafreniere, I think there ought to be an investigation.
What if the Penguins get him?
There should also be an investigation.
What's the hue and cry going to be like from the so-called purists if both 12 seeds make it to the next round?
Well, there'll be some complaining about it, but It is what I don't know anybody that can watch the hockey that we've seen play and just then start complaining about the 2014 setup because even the whiners on social media you see this talking about how much fun the hockey's been. Like, this has been enjoyable hockey. You've had a little bit of everything. There's been a physical play. There's what I always miss from the 1980s. People think, well, you missed the offense. Well, no, I missed the mistakes. Like, it was the mistakes in the 1980s that created the offense. And then all the coaches got together and said, let's clamp down and just make everybody play defense. So we got rid of the mistakes. Well, we have some mistakes now too in this tournament as well, and that's led to some fun offensive chances as well. So there'll be some people that will complain if we see what you suggested, but if you've got any sense of love of hockey, you'll realize that we're just fortunate that we have this chance to see this rest of the season play out.
Yeah, you're right. It has been very fun to watch, but at the same time, I do feel extremely bad for the sort of 5th, 6th seeds in both conferences. Because what you did during the regular season basically amounted to nothing. And I have always been a proponent of the way that the NHL playoff system ordinarily works does not reward the regular season nearly enough. You're getting one extra home game per round and playing against a team that finished in a playoff spot, yes, several places below you. But still, the parity between teams once you get into the playoffs, and you're talking about those top 16 teams, is extremely high. And there's a reason why the Stanley Cup playoffs are sort of rarely rewarding number 1 seeds with the Stanley Cup. And the way that they did this sort of 24-team tournament this year, I think that what they should have done was something more akin to the NBA model, where in the NBA, if the number 8 and the number 9 seeds finish within, I think it's 4 games of each other at the end of their conclusion of the regular season, where they're playing 8 more games, then they're having a little play-in series between the number 8 and the number 9 seeds. But the number 8 seed only needs to win 1 game, and the number 9 seed needs to win 2. And so I think that they should have done something like that, where with sort of the Penguins-Canadiens series, play a best of 5, but give Pittsburgh a 1-0 advantage off the hop, so they only have to win 2 more games instead of 3, and that way make the regular season that happened, that they worked so hard on, actually mean a little more than it did.
In fairness, to be fair to all the teams that really had a chance to get in, I thought they really needed to give 22 teams a chance. But 22 teams didn't work very well. And it'll be funny if the 23rd and 24th team end up advancing in all this, which, before you were just talking about there's a lot of parity in those 16 teams. Well, apparently there's a lot of parity in the 24 teams too.
Yeah.
But from what
it's just everyone but Detroit at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. Everybody but Detroit, yeah.
So another series, I guess it's kind of a surprise. Arizona Coyotes up 2-1 on Nashville. The odds in that series at the start weren't that wide. Nashville was minus 125 favorites. Arizona was plus 105 underdogs. Now that they're up 2-1, the Coyotes are the minus 275 favorites to take the series. You can get Nashville at plus 215. We thought Nashville would come back to what they were in this playoff setup, Kevin, but they still seem to be that floundering team that can't figure out who they are.
Yeah, what's funny about that is, when I talk to people around the league, they say things like, if they could get by this series, like, I wouldn't be shocked if they make a run. And I'm looking at this Nashville team going, are we watching the same team? Because even if they get by this series, I don't feel like they're going to make a run. Like, to me, they've just sort of settled into a non-championship caliber mode where they're, a decent team and they can be competitive some nights, but I don't see them as, gearing up, getting ready to make, a strong run. And their top players, I don't see any level of consistency out of Johansson. I don't see it out of Matt Duchene. We had a real good game out of Forsberg, and I think he has some ability. But from game to game, we just don't see it. And the other thing, they used to have, they being the Predators, I would say one of the top three defenses in the game. And now they have three defensemen, and then there's a real fall off. And I don't put them up there now with the top 5 or 6 defensemen. I put their top 3 up with the top threes and any of the teams. So I don't know. I mean, I see these Arizona and Nashville as both pretty comparable teams in terms of what they have to offer. And I think from a team defensive perspective, Arizona is better than Nashville. And I like their goalie, and I feel bad because I rode and I saddled up and was going to ride the Arizona horse for a while, for like 2 weeks going in, and then at the last minute I changed to Nashville because I kept listening to all the NHL people tell me how good this team could be, but we haven't seen this team be this good since they reached the final.
Yeah, their forwards just have not been good enough this year. And we look at their sort of roster construction and we see the names there. We see the Forsbergs, we see the Johanssons, and we think about what they could be if all those players are playing up to their potential. But they just haven't for a really extended period of time. And you look at their leading scorers from the regular season, it's defenseman Roman Josi with 65, and their top scoring forward is Philip Forsberg with 40 points. A defenseman had 18 more points than any forward on Nashville, and they wound up in the bottom half of the league in both goals for and goals against, and they are one of, I forget if it's 2 or 3 teams in this 2014 tournament that wound up with a negative goal differential in the regular season. So I agree completely with Kevin. I don't know what you are looking at from recent history that tells you that this Nashville team is going to do anything.
Well, we move on to one of the games on tap tonight. The Toronto Maple Leafs and Columbus Blue Jackets are deadlocked 1-1. Going into tonight's game, Toronto is a minus 150 favorite, and they are a minus 200 favorite to take the series. I'm kind of surprised, not so much at the odds tonight, but minus 200 on the Leafs. Those 2 games have been pretty tight. I don't think either team's really shown a decisive edge.
My favorite part about that is now that it's a best of 3, Toronto's odds are shorter than they were at the start of the series when it was a best of 5.
The Leafs are actually suiting up in the Raptors dressing room tonight, so maybe the odds makers suspect some championship pixie dust from the Raptors is going to magically sprinkle all over the Leafs and turn them into contenders tonight, Kevin. We saw them get shut out in game 1 and then shut out Columbus in game 2. Like which is the real Leafs, and how much do you think they're going to miss Jake Muzzin?
Oh, they're going to miss him a lot. Like, he's their most consistent defenseman in my mind. He's credible every night, and they have some talented players obviously on that team, but they just need a guy who can just be play defense when it's needed. He can kill penalties and everything, and that's why I think he's the absolute best on the team at getting that done. So I think they will miss him quite a bit. But that was a huge win, and the fact that they held the team, they got a shutout, because when you expect Toronto to win, you expect them to win 4-3, or 5-2, because they've got a lot of offensive firepower. So it was if you're a Maple Leafs fan, you got to be pleased with how they won that. Like, they didn't instantly transform themselves into the Boston Bruins defensively, but I think they showed they could play a style of play that you can win with in the postseason. Now, can they do that over an extended period? That's the question. But I thought all their top stars played well in that game.
Why do you think the odds makers are so heavy on Toronto, Sasha? It just doesn't seem to me, that price just seems a little, to me, way too high.
Yeah, I think that they've probably taken a lot of action on Toronto after game 2, because as Kevin said, that was one of the best games that Toronto's played, sort of complete games in this sort of Austin Matthews era. They held Columbus to, I think it was 20 shots, and not many of them were dangerous, and that's very rare for a Leafs game. So I think it is sort of recency bias on the part of both odds makers and bettors watching the last game and then thinking there's just no chance that this Columbus team is going to win 2 more games in this series, let alone maybe score 2 more goals. But if I'm approaching this, if I'm putting money on this series, it's not on Toronto at -200, because these are going to be very close, very low-scoring games between two teams that are getting excellent goaltending. And as we've seen in Pittsburgh, Montreal, though it's been higher scoring, there are a lot of very possible outcomes in that. And one of the very possible outcomes in Leafs Columbus is that we see a couple 1-0, 2-1 wins for Columbus over the next 3 games.
Now, the New York Islanders failed to finish off the Florida Panthers in Game 3 in that series, and the odds took a dramatic turn, still heavily favoring the Islanders, but they went from outrageous -1250 favorites to still quite outrageous -420 favorites. Florida dropped from +750 down to +320. And this series, when this series opened, it was one of the tightest ones on the board. The Islanders were at -120. Florida was at +100. So no one saw either of these teams really dominating. But have the Panthers woke up here, Kevin, or they just had one game to show that they're not a corpse and now they're going to lay down and die?
Well, I think the Islanders are going to take this. What's fascinating to me about the Panthers is that they were one of the better offensive teams in the league this season, and no one paid any attention just because they just don't look like a good hockey team. They never look like a good hockey team. They just look like they're patchwork. You don't see any cohesiveness. You don't see much pushback from them. And it's hard to put your finger on why this team isn't successful, because they have talented players. Like any team in the league would love to have Barkov or Huberdeau. Ekblad is a named defenseman. Keith Yandel is a great power play specialist. But when you blend them all together, they just don't look like a good hockey team. And I think everyone thought that Joel Quenneville was going to come in and bring some magic and sprinkle some magic dust on them, and they were suddenly going to be transformed into a quality team. But it just hasn't happened. And I think they've only scored 3 even strength goals in this series, and I think the Islanders' Barry Trotz will tighten up the screws a little bit on them in Game 4. They will find no room in Game 4, 0 room for them to score any goals.
We've got one other series on tap tonight. It's a late start, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, between the Calgary Flames, who can close out the Winnipeg Jets, who are really not the Winnipeg Jets in a lot of ways without Mark Scheifele and Patrick Laine. Can Winnipeg win another game in that series, Sasha? Or is it just was Game 2 kind of like that you see often when a team's short-staffed, they all dig deep and come up with that outstanding effort, but over the long haul, you can't replace what they've lost, and they've lost 2 pretty good players.
Yeah, those are huge losses, and you're right, you can't replace them, but I'm certainly not counting them out of Game 4 here, because they have a much better goalie again. And as we're talking about with these NHL underdogs, having the better goalie can take you a certain distance, maybe not all the way to the Cup Finals, but certainly win a couple games. And Hellebuck had an excellent season, and he's been pretty good in the playoffs so far, in particular in the first 2 games. So I'm not ruling them out. They have a roster still filled with NHL players who are working their tails off. And Calgary is by no means a perfect team. So probably just for the single game value of taking Winnipeg tonight, I'd probably be doing that. But I don't really want to bet on them to win the series, to win 2 straight, given how much they're missing.
No, one of the intriguing prop bets offered on this series, I was looking through the list of props, and interestingly enough, Winnipeg scored the first goal in every game of this series. In the pre-lockout days, giving up the first goal was a death sentence. You would not come back and win. And yet the Flames have come back to win 2 of the 3 games. But you can get a prop tonight on the Flames falling behind and coming back to win, and it comes at odds of plus 525. I'd be awful tempted to jump on that.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable. As we were talking about before the podcast, Calgary has had a problem with slow starts dating back to September, and that has obviously continued into these playoffs.
Well, as I see on the clock on the wall, we've run out of time. Thanks for tuning in to the Hockey Debates podcast, brought to you by Sports Betting Dime. Don't forget to check out sportsbettingdime.com. and see the NHL tracker gives you the latest odds on the Stanley Cup favorites. You can see the latest odds on all the trophy winners, contenders. I guess they're not winners yet. They got to vote.
Some of them are. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I think we know who's going to win some of them. Yeah. We'll see you again on Tuesday, and thanks for joining us.